Good morning guys and welcome to this new class. My name is the teacher Daniel Melgarejo and as well as Mr. Jose Bustamante, we're going to teach you a very interesting subject. And this subject is, as you can see in my back, we're going to talk about video games. Okay, I don't know how much you like video games. I've played video games since I was 5 years old, I think. How much do you play video games? How much time do you spend on playing video games? Video games are really part of our lives, especially if you are a teenager, right? Video games are a very common activity among young people, right? Today you may want to share some of your favorite video games. I have actually some video games on my iPad. And when I have spare time, I used to play with them. I used to play, for example, one of my favorite video games. The name is Walking War Robots. You can find it on the App Store if you have an iOS device, or if you have an Android device, you can find it too, right? And this is a very awesome game. And there are some other games maybe you liked more. For example, if you have a console like the PSP or the Xbox, right, you can find other kind of games. Today, since we are going to talk about video games, you may want to share more information, not just the name, but more information in details. And for that reason, you may need a really important particle that we are going to talk about now. And this grammar particle is the relative clause. Do you know what relative clauses are? When you make a sentence, for example, if you want to give more information, you may need these relative clauses. And there are two kinds of relative clauses. There are defining relative clauses and non-defining relative clauses. So imagine if you want to talk about your favorite game, you may want to share more information rather than just saying the name or the kind of games you like to play. So if you want to share more information, as I was saying, you may need these grammar particles, and that's what we are going to treat in this class. So please, as you always know, we are using this book, right? Our book. Yeah, the Gold Experience second version, right? In the second version, we are actually in the fifth unit, right? In the fifth unit. And in the fifth unit, we're going to be focused on video games. And you have a really interesting reading over here. And even though this is a class, okay, teachers usually use games for teaching you something new, okay? So I think this is very important when you teach, and this is very important when you learn. If you want to learn more, actually video games would be very useful. Okay, let me read this little part. Okay, I don't know if you can see it. This quote, let me quote this. And this quote says, while many schools and parents are trying to reduce the number of hours young people spend on gaming, teachers here are making video games a central part of their lessons. So you may have seen Mr. Jose Bustamante and I playing games like, for example, the Kahoot. I don't know if you have played with Kahoot in your sessions, right? That's a game, right? You can use, for example, another platform like QuizUp. Have you ever played with QuizUp? And as you may understand, we teachers use these kind of games, even video games, to teach you something new. So talking about video games and using video games for learning is very important. Let's go back to our subject. If you have your books, please open your book on the page number 68. And if you have your book on the page 68, you will find this grammar particle I was talking to you about. This is the relative clauses. Relative clauses. And let me talk about the defining relative clauses. Okay, let's talk about defining relative. In this first type, the defining relative clauses, Remember, when we say clauses, we are pointing out a sentence, okay? A clause is a sentence, okay? A sentence. A sentence that starts with a certain word. For example, when you want to give a defining clause, okay, that means that you want to give a defining sentence, okay? This sentence serves as essential information, okay? Essential information. For example, let me give you an example. The game encourages a creative approach, which in that word start the defining relative clause, which is rarely found in classes on this subject. As you can see, from the word which, we start giving extra information about the first one, right? You can find two sentences actually. The first sentence is, the game encourages a creative approach, and then you start giving more information, which is rarely found in classes on this subject. That means that the defining relative clauses give essential information. You cannot ignorate or substitute this sentence because it's essential for understanding the whole idea you are trying to share. Let me give you another example. You have the examples actually on the page number 68, okay? And one other example says, she has classmates, okay? That's a sentence. But if you want to share more information, you could say, she has classmates whose feelings are less positive. As you can see, if you say whose feelings are less positive, you are giving more information about the girl you are talking about, right? So these are the defining relative clauses. The defining relative clauses give essential information, okay? Essential information. It's information that you cannot ignore, okay? When you want to make a defining relative clause, you may use, as you can see in the book, we can use who, right? Referring to people or person, okay? You can use which, you can use when, you can use where, you can use whose, you can use that, okay? And let's go to the second type of relative clause. This second type is called non-defining. Obviously, you have the first type is defining relative clause, and the second type is non-defining relative clause. And what are non-defining relative clauses? These sentences, these clauses, gives extra information, but this information is not essential. Okay, so let me give you a kind of a summary. When you use defining relative clauses, these give you essential information you cannot ignore, right? But when you make a non-defining relative clause, you give extra information that you can ignore. This is not essential. This is essential, but this one not, okay? So that would be the main difference between these two. In the second, we're talking about the second, right? The non-defining relative clause. This gives extra information, but not essential information. That means that you can ignore this information and even understand the whole idea of the sentence. For example, if I say, Alexander Huza, who is a teacher at school, that's the non-defining relative clause, thinks this is just the start. As you can see, if I take this sentence, who is a teacher at the school, if I take this non-defining relative clause, I may understand the whole idea of the sentence even if I ignore this sentence, this non-defining relative clause, right? So that would be the main difference between these two. And when you want to give more information about your video games, and if you want to talk about your video games a little bit more specific, and you want to give details, you may use these two kind of relative clauses. Remember, relative clauses are sentences. Sentences give information, but this information could be essential or not essential. If it's essential, if it's really necessary information, it's a defining relative clauses. But if it's not, it's non-defining. So that would be the lesson of today opportunity. and I hope you can enjoy this class. And I think you're really going to enjoy this class because this talks about something very common among you, and especially in these days when we have the quarantine period, right? We feel really bored, maybe at home and not doing anything. You may want to play some of these well-known video games, and if you have more video games, please don't forget to comment, give your comments, and in the class you can give your comments too to the teacher. And maybe Mr. Jose Bustamante, he's also a fan of video games. I think this is a good opportunity, and I hope you really enjoy it, because I think this is very funny stuff. I don't know what you think. So thank you for paying attention, and I really enjoy this opportunity to talk to you about this very important thing of our lives, and I think it would be a good opportunity to practice more our English and share our knowledge about this subject, this topic with other people. Thank you for participating in this class. See you next time.